World War III, just the highlights.
Colonel Dorrian's going to start with a short update on counter-ISIS operations in Iraq and Syria.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to be back answering questions. Good morning. We'll start in Syria and we'll move on to Iraq. The Syrian Democratic Forces and their Syrian Arab coalition continue advancing as they further isolate Raqqa city. They continue to make progress in clearing ISIS fighters from the territory in the vicinity of Tabqa, having cleared territory east and north of Raqqa, where they are now nearing positions to enable their assault to liberate the city. As they've cleared, they've repelled a significant number of ISIS attacks as the enemy struggles to slow their advance. In the last 24 hours, they've cleared 11 square kilometers east of Raqqa and toward Tabqa, where the enemy remains completely isolated. Our partnered forces have encountered tough resistance from ISIS in the area, encountering VBID, direct and indirect fire attacks, as well as the use of human shields, which the enemy continues to use to slow their advance. As we reported earlier this week, coalition and partnered Syrian opposition groups repelled an ISIS attack targeting the Antaf garrison in southern Syria. ISIS initiated the attack with a VBID and 20 to 30 fighters with the ground assault and suicide vests. Coalition and partnered forces engaged and defended against the ISIS attack with direct fire before destroying enemy assault vehicles and the remaining fighters with coalition airstrikes. This is significant because the enemy has a track record of attempting spoiler attacks away from the main effort in an attempt to score propaganda points, which they hope will compensate for their lack of battlefield success against coalition and partnered forces. As in past attempts, they were unsuccessful and lost the fighters and the resources they brought to bear. This result also reflects the readiness of coalition and partnered forces to defend themselves, even when working in isolated areas. Moving on to Iraq, the Iraqi Security Forces continue making incremental progress on the west side of Mosul, as the enemy has intensified their exploitation of civilians by moving them in larger numbers into harm's way. Notably, the coalition has continued supporting the Iraqi Security Forces as they clear more deeply into West Mosul's dense urban terrain, where nearly 500 square kilometers of territory have been cleared since operations in West Mosul commenced on February 19th. The 16th Iraqi Army Division continues securing East Mosul as a hold force. The Iraqi Federal Police and Iraqi Emergency Response Division have continued their operations along the Tigris River, although their operations have been incremental due to enemy sniper fire and the use of human shields. The CTS continued progress in the dense urban terrain of the old city, overcoming direct fire engagements from the enemy. And to the west of the city center, the Iraqi 36th Brigade cleared territory north of Badoush. The Iraqi Security Forces retained control of both main routes west from Mosul, eliminating enemy freedom of movement. This enemy in Mosul is not going anywhere. With that, I'll be delighted to take your questions.
Colonel, just wanted to sort of clarify something. I believe in February, General Townsend had said Mosul and Raqqa should be retaken in 6 months. It's now April. Is that timeline still possible?
Well, I'm not going to get into the business of predicting timelines. We've continued to make good progress with our partnered forces in isolating the city. The enemy, once they're pinned down there, they're not going to be able to go anywhere. And we're going to continue to hammer them with strikes as our partners move in and retake the city. So General Townsend, I know, has been very clear that it's our intent to do the very best we can to get this done on our watch. None of that has changed. We're doing this as quickly as we can, and one of the reasons for that is because the enemy, any area that they control, there's tremendous human suffering there. So we're going to continue our operations at pace. We'll do those operations as quickly as we can, but I'm not going to get into the business of predicting an end date.
just a quick question on the relationship with Russia right now. What's going on with deconfliction? What can you tell us about that relationship with U.S. forces and Russian counterparts? Have tensions ratcheted up, especially with some of the diplomatic talk that's happening with Secretary of State Tillerson and President Trump, or are things still proceeding apace with military to military discussions?
Thanks, Ben. We continue conducting our operations at pace. We've continued our strikes in Syria, despite the tensions that were a result of the strikes that were conducted against the Syrian regime. This is something that we're going to continue. The Secretary of Defense made clear that he believes that we're operating in a safe and effective manner, and we'll continue to do that. We can't get into the business of discussing the day-to-day operations with regard to any discussions or lack thereof with regard to the deconfliction line. Doing so from my conversations with the people that are directly involved in that before is that was not a productive thing to do, and that's the reason that we are no longer doing readouts of what those discussions are, and we will not get back into that business. So thank you.
I understand that, but can you just comment real quick on how the relationship is between U.S. and Russia as far as the deconfliction stuff goes? I mean, are there still conversations happening, and can you talk at all about at what level those conversations are happening?
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't answer that for you. That's exactly what we're just not going to be able to discuss. Again, the Secretary of Defense is satisfied that we're conducting our operations in a safe manner. I know yesterday he told you that he felt that we were adequately deconflicted, and we'll continue our operations and accelerate them any way that we can to get these areas liberated from Daesh.
I think you said that strike operations in Syria are continuing apace. Earlier this week, CENTCOM said that offensive operations had slacked off somewhat in the aftermath of the cruise missile strike in order to do more defensive operations. Can you explain whether things have fully returned to the...
Well, in the last week, from the 4th to the 11th, we've conducted 123 strikes for the operations toward isolating and ultimately liberating RAQQA. So that's a significant number of strikes. We have made adjustments to our operations to account for the potential tensions that resulted from the strikes that were conducted because of the Syrian regime's chemical attacks. But make no mistake, we do plan on continuing our operations, and we do continue to look for ways to accelerate them.
Since the strike on Shariat Air Base, could you tell us whether the number of U.S. troops or the amount of the equipment on the ground in Syria have increased or not?
We continue to remain within our force management level, and we do continue to have troops that come into and out of Syria as necessary in order to conduct operations. As far as the specific numbers that are there, we're not going to do real-time reporting on exact numbers, so I really can't give you a tremendous amount of fidelity on that. What I can say is that there's been no real substantive change in where we're headed, the numbers of troops that we have as a result of what's happened. Turkey has played a tremendous role in rolling back ISIS territorial gains, and that's something that we welcome and would love to see continue. In the meantime, we do continue to do our work with our partnered force to isolate RAQQA, and that city is going to be liberated.
Is the SDF at this point, are they properly equipped to carry out that liberation? And is there anything additional equipment-wise, backing-wise that they might need to defeat ISIS in RAQQA?
Well, as you know, the coalition has brought additional firepower into Syria in order to support the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Syrian Arab Coalition in their advance. That comes in the form of marine artillery and also Apache gunships, which have been instrumental in supporting their advance in areas like Tabqa and in and around the areas that surround RAQQA. So we've brought those to bear. As far as what additional other capabilities might be brought in, I think that's a conversation for another day.
You mentioned the exploitation of civilians in West Mosul. While you were away, Colonel Skoraka told us about a video that he said showed civilians being smuggled into a building in ISIS where, in West Mosul, where they would then become casualties if an American or coalition strike was conducted on that building. But we haven't seen that video. Do you know what happened to it? And I have another question.
Yep, I know that the video was sent to U.S. Central Command headquarters for further review. I believe that's probably where to follow up with regard to the release timeline, because my understanding is preparations are being made, or review is underway there as far as whether that'll be released and at what time it will be released.
On the question of whether strikes have been scaled back in Syria, I briefly glanced at the strike summary today, and it was a particularly small number of strikes in Syria. Is that because of weather, deconfliction problems, or force protection?
Yeah, in any given day, the number of strikes will fluctuate, David, and all the factors that you described could play a role. So we've had some bad weather the last several days, and I think we're going to have a few more days of very tough weather, but I would say any opportunity that we have to conduct strikes or to accelerate them in order to support our partners' advance, we're going to take that opportunity and do so. We're going to get this done as quickly as we can. We're going to conduct our strikes to support our partners, because one of the things that's very important to understand is that millions of people have been able to return to their homes because of the rollback of ISIS territorial gains. And a lot of the reason for that is the coalition airstrikes that have supported our partners as they've taken that territory back. There just wouldn't be anywhere near the number of people that have been able to return to their homes without those strikes, and I think that's a very important point for people to understand.
What is the principal ISIS tactic that they're using in an effort to slow Iraqi forces' movement into West Mosul?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I would say no single tactic. They have a layered defense, and they've had 2 years to build it. Unfortunately, one of the ones that's most problematic and difficult is their use of human shields. They've intensified their efforts to bring civilians into harm's way. This is something that is a despicable and cowardly tactic. But make no mistake, they had 2 years plus to dig elaborate defenses. We've seen them use commercial off-the-shelf drone technology. We've seen them use snipers. We've seen them use VBIDs. And now, as we move into this very dense urban terrain on the west side of Mosul, where the roads may not even really be qualified as what most reasonable people would call a road. They're so narrow that it channelizes the advance for the Iraqi Security Forces. That combination of things, explosives, booby traps, snipers, the use of civilian shields, just makes it very slow and difficult going. The Iraqi Security Forces continue their advance, but it's very, very difficult. And it's just going to remain so for a while.
You said that when you were referencing the number of strikes near RAQQA this week, that that there were adjustments to operations to account for tensions following the strikes last Thursday. What kind of, can you give us an example of how those tensions may be manifesting? What are you seeing that shows tension?
Well, you've seen the public statements. I don't have to regurgitate those for you, but what I would say is when you see those types of public statements and you know that you're doing something that changes the dynamic, it's just appropriate to make sure that you're taking appropriate measures to account for that. We don't want to be reckless, and we don't want to have some type of incident that would cause a miscalculation or some type of unintended incident. So I probably cannot get deeply into exactly what the adjustments are in the interest of force protection and maintaining operational security, but I would say that it is certainly appropriate to say we made some adjustments to what our forces in Syria were doing to account for the fact that the strikes against the Syrian regime chemical capability did increase tensions there.
I'd like to ask you to try to be as precise as you can. You just said that you hope to get back to normal operations as quickly as you can in Syria. So is the downturn specifically in airstrikes that continues right now due to force protection, deconfliction, plus weather? Because you've just told us that you're not at normal operations.
Yep, I think I've probably been about as specific as I can, Barbara. We have experienced some very tough weather. We have made some adjustments based on force protection and the increased tensions. All those things have to be taken into account. But make no mistake, we do plan on accelerating any time that we're able. And again, as I've said many times, any ISIS resources in Syria or Iraq, regardless of where they are subject to attack by coalition air, artillery, whatever resources that we can bring to bear to bring about their destruction. So fighters, resources, anything that the enemy is using to resist the advance of our partnered forces, all those things are subject to attack, and we'll take every opportunity that we can to safely and with precision destroy those capabilities.
You had said on deconfliction at the beginning, your words, it was not productive to talk about it. Can you please explain what is not productive? Why is it not productive, in your words, to talk about it? And you also described Mosul fighting right now as incremental. So I take that to mean it's not going as planned. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you meant about incremental as well as not productive to discuss deconfliction?
Yep, the military-to-military discussions between us and Russia on deconfliction, previously having day-to-day discourse about what those discussions are is a departure from their purpose. Their purpose was always to conduct those discussions to protect safety of flight, not as some type of effort to do public statements or that sort of thing. And so these are discussions that we just want to keep focused on what they are intended to do, safety of flight. So we're not going to get into the day-to-day discussions anymore, and that's just how we'll have to do it from here on out. With regard to incremental in Mosul, that word is inaccurate description of what's happening. The Iraqi Security Forces do continue to advance, so we knew that it was going to be very difficult. We've been saying for months that the enemy's had an opportunity to dig elaborate defenses, that it was going to be very hard. We've said for many months that as we got into the old part of the city, the dense urban terrain there, that it would be extraordinarily difficult. And what we're seeing is exactly what we expected to see. So I'm just trying to give you an accurate description of what's happening. I don't want to say that, hey, they continue to advance at pace, when in reality it's very, very slow and very, very hard, and it's gut-busting, difficult fighting between our forces and theirs. But our forces and the Iraqi Security Forces continue to make progress. It's very slow. It's very tough. One of the reasons for that is because we want to do it in a manner that protects civilian life. Prime Minister Abadi's been very clear on that, and it's been an enduring principle of the campaign throughout. So if it has to be done slow, that's how it's going to be done. But we're going to continue.
However, you don't want to talk about it, but you do continue to have, I think you just said, day-to-day discussions with the Russians.
Nope, I didn't say that. I told you we're not going to discuss it.
Please, why it's detrimental to talk about the deconfliction talks. You've been talking about them up until now. You've called them useful. You've called them effective. You've said that they've saved pilots' lives. That would lead a lot of people, the fact that you're not speaking about it now would lead a lot of people to believe they're not going on now. Why can't you just say, are the deconfliction talks going on with the Russians through this channel currently, or are they not?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that. We're not going to discuss it. It's as simple as that. It wasn't productive for us to continue doing it, and so we're not doing it anymore.
Colonel, could you talk about what's been going on in Idlib since the chemical attack? Presumably the Russians and the Syrians are forging ahead to take over that area. How many airstrikes have you seen from either side, ground movements? Just talk about what you've seen since the chemical attack.
Tom, I'm afraid I really can't get into that with you because it doesn't really have a direct relationship to the fight against ISIS. We continue to focus our energy here at Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve on supporting our partners who are isolating RAQQA. So what's happening in Idlib, I think, would probably be best directed to U.S. Central Command. I hope you understand, it's just not really our portfolio.
On Mosul, it sounds like what they're doing now is sort of encircling Mosul. Is that correct?
Mosul has been encircled for quite some time. What's happening now is that as the CTS and the Iraqi Federal Police and Emergency Response Division press more deeply into the very dense urban terrain along the Euphrates River and in the old part of the city, the 9th Iraqi Army Division continues clearing territory to the north and to the west of the center of the city, and then reducing the size of the cordon where, and this is the territory that the enemy still retains some degree of freedom of movement. But the freedom of movement is only within that shrinking cordon. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to be able to leave to the west. They are cut off. So the force that's in the west side of Mosul, the fighters that are there, they have really two choices. They can surrender to the Iraqi Security Forces, or they're going to be killed.
Just to follow up on the activities of the Syrian Air Force, by some assessments, the strike last week wiped out as much as a fifth of their operational aircraft. Have you seen a proportional reduction in their conducting airstrikes? Have you seen any noticeable difference in their air activity? Perhaps are you seeing more Russian involvement to make up for that shortcoming?
Paul, I understand your question. I'm afraid it's really not within our portfolio. This is something that's probably best directed to U.S. Central Command. We continue to focus on ISIS. We've not really detected any discernible change in the impact of what we intend to do. We've made some adjustments in the interest of making sure that we account for any increased tensions, but as far as impact of what those strikes are, it's just not directly related to what we are doing.
Separately, we'd seen some reports in recent weeks of ISIS fighters moving south from RAQQA and Mosul into sort of southeast Syria and into west Iraq. Is that a trend that you're still noticing, and do you see any significant sort of massing, or not massing, but sort of rallying of forces there?
Yeah, anytime that the enemy remains under pressure in one area, they are going to try to look for places to go. This is one of the reasons why we have a force in southern Syria at the Entente garrison. They continue to work with partnered forces to further reduce enemy freedom of movement in the open desert, in the areas that are more remote south of RAQQA. So this is something that we continue to build upon. You know, the enemy thought probably that they had a window of opportunity or the potential to conduct a strike where we had forces that were operating in a fairly remote location. They were wrong about their ability to conduct a successful attack. They were routed. Once they made their initial attack, things turned south for them very quickly. And this is an example, working with those partnered forces in some of these remote areas. We're not just working in these major areas like RAQQA and Mosul. We continue to work with our partnered forces in Syria and in Iraq to eliminate these other areas where ISIS might wish to go. We want to make sure that that's a wish.
Colonel, I understand that you're not the releasing authority anymore for this video that purportedly shows ISIS herding people into buildings in Mosul and even executing someone on the spot. But do you think it undercuts the U.S. credibility when you make that kind of allegation of a really spectacular atrocity, a war crime, claim that you have the video to back it up, say that you're going to release it shortly, and then it never gets released because it doesn't appear we're going to see that video anytime soon?
Yeah, the decision to release or not release the video now resides at CENTCOM, so I'll refer you to them with regard to that. What I can tell you is that the atrocities of ISIS are well documented not just by us, but by witnesses on the ground, human rights groups. There is their own releases of videos. They've hung people as an example to others in the western side of Mosul, and they leave them hanging there as an example of what will happen to people who try to escape the city. That's well documented by a lot more than just the coalition.
Quick follow-up. Has there been any change in the assessment that ISIS is using this tactic of forcing groups of people into locations where they will potentially become mass casualties and thereby stoke outrage against the coalition? Has there been any change to the assessment that that's what occurred in this incident in Mosul where so many civilians were killed? And has there been any change in their tactic? Are they still using that tactic?
The enemy does continue to use that tactic. That's among the many things that you see from multiple witnesses, people that have been victims of that. With regard to the specifics of the March 17th strike, that's still under an investigation, a 15-6 investigation conducted by an Air Force officer here. So I don't want to get ahead of that investigation with regard to that specific incident. But there is a growing body of evidence that those types of things are happening. Human rights groups have done a lot of interviews. We have seen reportage of it from media who are on the ground that have discussed it with some of the victims of that. So yes, the enemy does continue to do that. It's a despicable tactic and unfortunate and heartbreaking, but it is something that we're seeing.
I just wanted to follow up on Paul's question really quickly. I know you don't want to speak necessarily to the regime's air operations, but the Russian Ministry of Defense today said that the cruise missile strikes had a direct effect on their campaign against ISIS. I know a few months ago, I think you said that you started to see an uptick in both the regime and Russia's airstrikes against ISIS due to fighting around Palmyra and Deir ez-Zor. Have you seen any impact on their efforts in recent days to fight ISIS? Are you seeing any activity by the Russians or the regime in Damascus to fight ISIS?
Yeah, as far as what the impact is against ISIS, I think that's something that we'll have to observe and see. What I would say is the strike was conducted because of the chemical weapons use against the people of Syria, and as a result, they've had their capabilities reduced. So if they would like to continue to ramp up their campaign against ISIS, it would be best and in their interest to not use chemical weapons so that some of their capabilities will remain.
Since the cruise missile strike, have the Russian or Syrian regime forces made any threatening moves toward U.S. troops on the ground in Syria?
No.
Iranian forces or Iranian proxy forces?
No.
Can the American people expect any more U.S. troops going to Iraq or Syria anytime soon?
Well, I think that's a conversation for another day. As you know, the president has ordered a review of the campaign to determine what can be done to accelerate the campaign against ISIS. I understand that a shell of a plan is coming together, but as far as what might happen in the future, that is a discussion for another day. It's not something that we would speculate on from here.
Just to follow up to your answer to Jamie McIntyre's question, you mentioned the airstrike in West Mosul on March 17th and the investigation into that. When can we expect a report?
Well, as you might imagine, with an incident of the high visibility nature and the possibly very difficult outcome there, there are going to be levels of review for the investigation result. So I don't want to get into an exact timeline for when that'll be done and when it'll be released. What I would say is I spoke with the investigating officer today, and he continues to gather information. He continues to speak with witnesses. I know that there's been some lab work conducted to try and look at some samples of various substances that were found around the sites. There have been engineers and experts brought in. There have been a lot of witnesses interviewed, including media who were present or had access to people in the scene in the time since the strike was conducted. So we continue to gather information. The intent is to get as comprehensive a picture as we possibly can about what's happened, and then to be as transparent as we can with regard to exactly what happened and what steps are needed in the follow-up from what's happened.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, you mentioned transparency, and that's something that Lieutenant General Townsend mentioned as well. I mean, are you encouraging organizations like Amnesty to conduct their own investigations or perhaps get involved in or supply material to this investigation? And can you talk a bit about what you mean by transparency?
Well, we're going to release the results of our investigation. So, there are areas where there may be some classification of specific capabilities or that sort of thing, but we're going to release as much information as we can and give people a good picture of what's transpired. As far as the various groups that also review what's happened, I know that General Eisler has spoken with several of them, and he will continue to gather information from whatever sources he can to get as clear a picture as we can.
Colonel, U.S. troops were in close proximity with the Russians and regime forces in Manbij. And is this proximity still being kept, or does the U.S. forces still see the Russians around Manbij, or have you moved back them in a distant place as a measure of an adjustment to the force protection measure? Thank you.
No, our forces continue their work in that area, and nothing has really changed with regard to that.
Has the U.S. posture there changed in any way?
No.
World War III, just the highlight.
USS Porter and USS Ross conducted Tomahawk cruise missile strikes against the Syrian Air Force airfield in response to the Syrian government's chemical weapons attack, which killed and injured hundreds of innocent Syrian people, including women and children. Initial indications are that this strike has severely damaged or destroyed Syrian aircraft and equipment, reducing their government's ability to deliver chemical weapons. Admiral John Richardson testified before the House Armed Services Committee on the damage caused to the military services by a continuing resolution.
Mr. Chairman, we need that FY17 bill and the supplemental in order to keep Navy programs and key investments moving forward, to recover readiness this year, prevent digging the readiness hole deeper, and to sustain it into the near future.
For today's briefing, we're joined by Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and General Joseph Votel, Commander of U.S. Central Command in Tampa, Florida. We will start with a few opening remarks, then proceed directly to your questions.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I previously released a statement on the U.S. military's response to the Syrian regime's use of chemical weapons. I thought this was an appropriate time now for General Votel and me to update you on the military action itself. Last Tuesday, on the 4th of April, the Syrian regime attacked its own people using chemical weapons. I have personally reviewed the intelligence, and there is no doubt the Syrian regime is responsible for the decision to attack and for the attack itself. In response to the attack, our government began a deliberate process, led by the National Security Council, to recommend diplomatic and military options to the President. We met over several days, and I spoke with some of our allies. The National Security Council considered the near century-old international prohibition against the use of chemical weapons, the Syrian regime's repeated violations of that international law, and the inexplicably ruthless murders the regime had committed. We determined that a measured military response could best deter the regime from doing this again. As always, we examined how best to avoid civilian casualties in the execution of the strike, and our actions were successful. Based on these considerations, on 6 April, the President directed military action consistent with our vital national interest to deter the use of chemical weapons. This military action demonstrates the United States will not passively stand by while Assad blithely ignores international law and employs chemical weapons he had declared destroyed. We were aware of the presence of Russians at the airfield and took appropriate actions to ensure no Russians were injured in the attack. Our military policy in Syria has not changed. Our priority remains the defeat of ISIS. ISIS represents a clear and present danger, an immediate threat to Europe, and ultimately a threat to the United States homeland. In closing, the Syrian regime should think long and hard before it again acts so recklessly in violation of international law against the use of chemical weapons. General Votel will now provide further information on the strike.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. As Secretary Mattis stated, United States Central Command was directed to develop military options in response to the Syrian regime's use of chemical weapons. We did that and developed a target strike package with the goal being to eliminate those capabilities, including airframes, equipment, and fuel supplies that provided offensive military capacity for the regime from Shayrod Airfield. We did not deliberately target personnel in these strikes. Once the order was received, we targeted 59 locations on the airfield and struck 57 of those. We assessed that we achieved our stated objective, and the regime's ability to generate offensive military capability from Shayrod Airfield, which we assess was the launching point for this chemical attack, has been severely degraded. We are obviously paying close attention to the environment in the wake of these strikes and remain appropriately postured to respond as necessary. Meanwhile, we are focused on the Defeat ISIS campaign, which remains our primary mission. In closing, I want to commend the exceptional skill and professionalism of our military forces involved in this strike operation. They performed extraordinarily well, and we are very, very proud of them.
Secretary Mattis, thank you. You mentioned that defeating ISIS in Syria is your main priority. But in light of the chemical attack is it your view that the U.S. should take some additional steps, such as creating safe zones or no-fly zones, or even attempting to or removing Bashar al-Assad from power? And if I may ask General Votel if you could bring us up to date on the prospects for sending additional troops to Syria to accelerate the campaign there.
Bob, the goal right now in Syria and the military campaign is focused on accomplishing that, is breaking ISIS, destroying ISIS in Syria. This was a separate issue that arose in the midst of that campaign, the use by the Assad regime of chemical weapons, and we addressed that militarily. But the rest of the campaign stays on track exactly as it was before Assad's violation.
You don't see a point in doing safe zones or no-fly zones?
Those other issues that you bring up are always under consideration among allies, and certainly the president has options, but right now the purpose of this attack was singular against the chemical weapons use.
Mr. Secretary, you said, I believe, that Assad should think long and hard about doing this again. It seems like you are sending him a very direct military message. What message are you sending to Assad about this? Why do you feel, what message are you sending? Why do you feel he chose to do this not until the Trump administration took office? Did he read the signals from administration officials that ISIS was no longer the top priority? While ISIS might be the priority, regime change was not. Do you feel that that's the signal he got, and are you sending him a new signal? And for you, General Votel, although you don't talk about future military operations and ISIS remains a priority, how prepared are you, how prepared is Central Command to take on additional military targeting? Do you feel you know, even if you can't say, where his chemical weapons are at this point?
Barbara, we believe that Assad has used chemical weapons several times over the last several years, violated the international law that has prohibited their use since 1925. Syria is a signatory to that international convention. For them to have done this several times recently, over the last several years, is what I mean by recently. You've got to ask him why he chose now to try it again. I trust he regrets it now, considering the damage done to his Air Force. But when I say he should think long and hard about it, I'll just let the mission speak for itself on that score.
U.S. Central Command Commander, I'm very confident that we can respond to any directions or orders that the Secretary or the President give us in the region.
Do you know where his other chemical weapons are?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to speculate on what we know or don't know here, but again, I remain very confident in our forces and our ability to respond when we're asked to do things.
Could you just bring us up to date about what measures you're taking in this kind of new, more tense environment to ensure protection of U.S. forces on the ground in Syria? And General Secretary Mattis, could you please let us know, how does what you're doing militarily in Syria fit into a broader strategy being developed by this administration?
How the broader strategy, as you know, is embedded inside a global strategy. And overall, right now, the Americans are making very clear that ISIS is in our crosshairs. And that's what our conduct of the campaign in Syria is designed to take on ISIS and defeat them. This other effort that came up in the midst of that had to be addressed because it addresses a vital national interest of ours that chemical weapons not be used, that the bar not keep getting lowered by the Assad regime so this becomes commonplace. We had to make a very, very clear statement on this.
Phil, I would just add that, force protection, of course, is something we always pay attention to, and as the environment always changes, we have to change with that. So we're paying a lot of it. We continue to pay a lot of attention to that. As we executed this operation, I think we took very prudent measures to make sure that our forces, all of our coalition forces that were operating with us, were well protected, were well aware of what was going on, and we had prudent measures in place. And what we have done is we've trusted our commanders on the ground to with the authority and the decision-making capability to resume operations as they assess the environment. And so I remain very confident in their ability to do that.
There have been mixed messages from the administration about whether you are calling for regime change in Syria. Are you prepared are you calling for Assad to step aside, and are you prepared militarily if he were to step aside tomorrow? General Votel, have you seen any evidence that the Iranians were involved in this chemical attack, Qasem Soleimani in particular, and any evidence that Assad is moving his chemical stockpiles around within Syria?
Jennifer, the strike that we're talking about here today was directed at the people who planned it, who held on to the weapons, contrary to what they had promised the international community and the United Nations when they said they had gotten rid of all those weapons. And the reason for the strike was that alone. It was not a harbinger of some change in our military campaign.
Jennifer, I'm unaware of any information regarding Iran's participation in this, and I think we've seen some information that the regime has moved some aircraft and other things around. So I would imagine there's some movement of his equipment that is taking place. Whether it's chemicals or not, I don't think I can comment on that.
I'd like to ask both of you if you believe that Russia had advanced knowledge of this strike, and if Russia should be considered as complicit in this strike, the chemical weapons attack.
Yeah, David, I can speak for both of us on that one. It was very clear that the Assad regime planned it, orchestrated it, and executed it. And beyond that, we can't say right now. We know what I just told you. We don't know anything beyond that.
In this room on Friday, a briefer said that at the time of the attack, a drone was sighted over that village, and they weren't sure whether it was a Russian or a Syrian drone. Has it been determined yet whether that drone was Russian or Syrian?
I don't know. I will tell you that we have gone back through and looked at all the evidence we can, and it is very clear who planned this attack, who authorized this attack, and who conducted this attack itself. That we do know, with no doubt whatsoever. Yeah,
Mr. Secretary, can you help us understand why the death of innocent men, women, and children from a chemical weapon warrants a U.S. military response, but the deaths of far more men, women, and children in Syria from conventional weapons, barrel bombs, does not warrant a military response?
I think what we have to look at here, Jamie, is a policy decision by the United States. There is a limit, I think, to what we can do. And when you look at what happened with this chemical attack, we knew that we could not stand passive on this, but it was not a statement that we could enter full-fledged, full-bore into the most complex civil war probably raging on the planet at this time. So the intent was to stop the cycle of violence into an area that even in World War II, chemical weapons were not used on battlefields. Even in the Korean War, they were not used on battlefields. Since World War I, there's been an international convention on this. And to stand idly by when that convention is violated, that is what we had to take action on urgently in our own vital interest.
We were expecting a new counter-ISIL plan this spring. With these developments, does this delay that in any way? And what are your thoughts on finding a way toward an endpoint for both the ISIS war and what should happen in Syria with regard to your military campaign and the rest of the whole of government campaign that, General, you've been asking for?
Well, the counter-ISIL plan has been put in skeleton form. It's being fleshed out now. This has got to be done in a methodical way, where we look at each element of it. A couple weeks ago, Secretary Tillerson had 68 nations in town with his counterparts, the fellow foreign ministers, and they are working on the stabilization efforts in Syria. This is not the United States working alone. It's a very, very complex security situation, and it's one that we're going to have to address in a very methodical manner. And it's not something you can simply add water to a dehydrated plant and it's suddenly a full-fledged plan. This is hard work, and it's going to take time.
I think, the campaign plan remains where we thought that it would be at this particular point. We're obviously engaged in very difficult fighting in both Mosul and around the RAQQA area, which is where we expected to be at this time, and we anticipated the fighting would be difficult at this particular part, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing. So, again, we certainly won't put a timeline on this. It'll ultimately prove us to be wrong, but I think this is proceeding about the way that we expected it would at this point.
Secretary Mattis mentioned about that Assad has used chemical weapons several times over the last several years. What chemicals have you seen there? Are we talking chlorine or something more specific?
We have, of course, we've seen chlorine. It's been documented by independent medical authorities. They've been using chemical weapons, so you're correct. That's what we were looking at.
No other nerve agents that you've seen since, other than the chlorine in the last several years, besides this one attack last week?
I believe you're correct, but this time it was not chlorine, quite clearly, and we know that for certain. There's no doubt. This is a medical fact.
But I would emphasize to you, I remain very confident that we are continuing to operate in a very safe and effective manner in the air. The deconfliction line has been very useful for us in the past as a venue for professional airman-to-airman exchange, and it was useful for us on the night of the strike, both in our pre-notification to the Russians and in our immediate communication that we had afterwards.
Are we not talking about the deconfliction line because it's not being used?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No, the operation goes on. It's well deconflicted. The operations are going quite safely right now.
At what point is there a danger of this spiraling out of control and the conflict between two nuclear-powered countries?
I don't believe I've talked about red lines. I generally shy away from it myself. I recommend Assad be rather cautious about violating international law with chemical weapons. I suppose that could be considered a red line, so I won't argue the point. It will not spiral out of control. As you know, Secretary of State Tillerson is in Moscow. We maintain communications with the Russian military and with the diplomatic channels. It will not spiral out of control.
Gives you that assurance. I mean, the Russians have been very clear in their rhetoric. I'll take your point that you've not said the word red lines. The Russians have. They're saying that another response, like the one you launched on April 6th, would be a red line for them. How are you so confident that this isn't going to spiral out of control?
Well, I'm confident the Russians will act in their own best interest, and there's nothing in their best interest to say they want this situation to go out of control. Yes, ma'am.
As you consider the U.S. force posture after ISIS is defeated in Mosul and RAQQA, are you contemplating maintaining U.S. bases or a U.S. base in Iraqi Kurdistan so as to be able to check any further resurgence of an ISIS-like group?
The short answer is we are in consultations with the Iraqi government about what the stabilization phase looks like. There have been no decisions. There have been no offers made. Either way, we're in consultation. We're talking about what the tactical situation will probably look like. As you can tell, that some of that would be assumptions right now, since we have an active enemy still in the Euphrates River Valley, in Tal Afar, and of course the ongoing fight there in West Mosul. So that it would be premature to come to conclusions about that now, or even enter into the specifics about it now, until we actually have this enemy on the run out of there. But we would be willing to engage with the Iraq government on how this should look in the future.
Has the White House given the military authority to preemptively strike at Syria if, in fact, you had knowledge of a looming chemical attack?
Oh.
You've not been given authority to preemptively strike if you know in advance of a Syrian attack?
No, we have not.
Does the U.S. view chlorine, barrel bombs filled with chlorine now as a chemical weapon?
As far as barrel bombs with chlorine, I mean, chemical weapons are chemical weapons. So that is the issue if you're talking about the strike we took. It's not about whether it's delivered with an artillery shell or it's delivered by a helicopter with a barrel bomb or a fighter aircraft with a bomb. It's about chemical weapons, and we've made clear where we stand on that. President Trump has made it exceedingly clear where the United States stands on that sort of malfeasance. You guys got lots of questions here today. My gosh, young lady, you've been very patient the whole time. Go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, I was hoping you can clarify something. In your statement yesterday, you said the cruise missile strikes took out 20% of Syria's operational aircraft. There was some confusion over that statement. Can you clarify it and explain how much of a blow it was to Syria's overall capability? And General Votel, we're in the process of isolating RAQQA right now. Does the coalition and our partnered forces there have what they need to begin the offensive on RAQQA, and what more resources do they need?
Yeah, the Syrian Air Force is not in good shape. It's been worn down by years of combat plus some plus significant maintenance problems. We thought it was about. I thought it was about 20%. I think it's around 20 aircraft were taken out, which probably equates to about that. Although I probably shouldn't have used the 20%. We're trying to provide information as it comes in, and this is one of the challenges of trying to get it accurate, but get it out as quickly as we can actually give you some fidelity. But it's around 20 aircraft, and that damage to the Syrian Air Force is pretty severe, as you can tell.
You know, with respect to what's going on in RAQQA, I think we have the capabilities we need to do what we're doing right now, which is the isolation of RAQQA, and I think we're seeing that play out every day right now as our partners on the ground very effectively isolate this particular area as we move forward. Obviously, the Secretary and I and others are in consultation here on what additional resources we need, and I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to clarify something you said earlier because it's an important point. Is it your contention that chemical weapons, if it's a barrel bomb holding chlorine, chemical weapons only being that with the use of a nerve agent, that is a chlorine in a barrel bomb would not necessarily lead to U.S. strikes, but it is the use of a nerve agent, that's the distinction you're making? I just want to make sure I'm understanding the point you were making earlier.
Right. I just want to say very clearly that the use of chemical weapons, contrary to the Geneva Convention that Syria has signed up for, using chemical weapons that Syria agreed under UN pressure to remove from their arsenal. Those chemical weapons that the Russians certified were gone, that if they use chemical weapons, they are going to pay a very, very stiff price.
World War III, just the highlight.